Montana Territory, 1882. The stagecoach wheels ground against frozen earth as Catherine Walsh pressed her face to the frost-covered window, watching the towering peaks of the Bitterroot Mountains emerge through swirling snow. Her gloved fingers clutched a bundle of letters tied with blue ribbon, each page worn soft from countless readings during the 3-week journey from Philadelphia. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The coach lurched violently as it navigated another hairpin turn, and Catherine's stomach dropped along with it. She had never seen mountains like these, vast and merciless, their snow-covered summits disappearing into grey clouds that promised more winter, despite the calendar insisting it was already March. The landscape bore no resemblance to the gentle, rolling hills outside Philadelphia, where she had spent her 23 years teaching at Miss Whitmore's Academy for Young Ladies. Bitter Creek Station, next stop. The driver's voice cut through the wind. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. After 6 months of correspondence, she would finally meet Thomas Harrison, the man whose thoughtful letters had convinced her to abandon everything familiar for this remote corner of the Montana Territory. She untied the ribbon and withdrew his most recent letter, dated February 10th. His handwriting was bold and confident. "My dear Catherine, by the time you read, this spring will be breaking over the mountains, and I will be counting the days until your arrival. The cabin is ready, the mine is producing well, and I have prepared everything for our life together. The St. Bernard pup I mentioned in my last letter has grown into a magnificent companion. Rex will love you as much as I already do." Catherine smiled despite her nervousness. Thomas had written extensively about Rex, the St. Bernard he had rescued as a puppy from a snowstorm 2 winters ago. The dog had become his constant companion during long months of solitary mining, and Thomas claimed Rex possessed an almost supernatural intelligence when it came to navigating the treacherous mountain terrain. The stagecoach began its descent into a valley, and Catherine caught her first glimpse of Bitter Creek Station. The settlement consisted of perhaps a dozen buildings scattered along a frozen stream, their roofs heavy with snow, smoke rising from stone chimneys into the grey afternoon sky. It wasn't the thriving mining town Thomas had described in his letters, but Catherine reminded herself that appearances could be deceiving in this harsh landscape. Her trunk contained everything she owned: her mother's china, carefully wrapped in quilts, the few books she couldn't bear to leave behind, her warmest clothes, and the modest savings she had accumulated during her years of teaching. She had sold her father's house after his death 6 months earlier, used most of the proceeds to settle his debts, and invested the remainder in this journey west. There was no safety net, no family to return to if this new life didn't unfold as planned. The coach shuddered to a halt outside a building bearing a weathered sign, Murphy's Trading Post. Catherine peered through the window, searching the small crowd of onlookers for a tall man with dark hair and kind eyes, the way Thomas had described himself. Instead, she saw only rough-looking men in fur coats and wide-brimmed hats, their faces weathered by wind and cold. "End of the line, miss," the driver called down. "Bitter Creek Station." Catherine gathered her traveling bag and stepped down onto the packed snow. The cold hit her like a physical blow, far more intense than any Philadelphia winter. Her breath formed white clouds as she looked around, expecting Thomas to emerge from one of the buildings. "You must be the lady coming to marry Tom Harrison," a gruff voice said behind her. Catherine turned to see a stocky man in his 50s, his beard streaked with grey, approaching with what appeared to be forced cheerfulness. "Yes, I'm Catherine Walsh," she replied, extending her gloved hand. "Is Thomas here?" "I expected him to meet the stage." The man's expression faltered slightly. "I'm Jake Murphy, own the trading post here. Tom's, well, he's been delayed. Had some business up at his claim that's keeping him tied up. Asked me to bring you up to his cabin." Something in Murphy's tone sent a chill through Catherine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Delayed. His letter said he would be here. Mining schedules don't always follow plans, miss, Murphy said quickly. The weather's been unpredictable this winter. Tom's probably just making sure everything's perfect before you arrive. The explanation felt hollow, but Catherine had little choice but to accept it. The stagecoach was already departing, carrying away her last connection to the familiar world she had left behind. Murphy helped load her trunk onto a horse-drawn sled, the runners designed for navigating snow-covered mountain trails. As they prepared to leave Bitter Creek Station, Catherine noticed other residents watching from doorways and windows, their expressions unreadable. A woman in a faded dress stepped out of the trading post, her eyes meeting Catherine's with what looked like sympathy before she quickly turned away. "How far is Thomas's cabin?" Catherine asked as Murphy urged the horses forward. "About 8 miles up into the mountains," Murphy replied, not meeting her eyes. "The trail's steep, but these horses know the way. Tom's got a good setup up there. The cabin's solid, mines producing color regular-like. They traveled in relative silence, the sled runners whispering across packed snow as they climbed higher into the mountains. The trail wound through dense forests of pine and fir, their branches heavy with snow that occasionally dropped in sudden avalanches of white powder. Catherine had never experienced such profound quiet, broken only by the rhythm of the horses' hooves and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. The beauty was undeniable, but also intimidating. These mountains dwarfed anything Catherine had imagined, their peaks disappearing into clouds that seemed to press down on the world below. She began to understand why Thomas had written about the landscape's effect on a person's soul, how it stripped away pretense and revealed what truly mattered. "Tom mentioned much about his mining operation?" Murphy asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Some," Catherine replied carefully. "He wrote that he'd found a promising vein of gold, that the claim was producing steadily." Murphy nodded without enthusiasm. "Gold's tricky business up here. Veins play out, weather shuts down operations for months at a time. Takes a special kind of man to make it work." "Thomas seems to have succeeded," Catherine said, though Murphy's comments were stirring fresh doubts. His letters spoke of plans to expand the operation, perhaps hire additional miners. "Tom's always been optimistic," Murphy said. And again, Catherine detected something strange in his tone, a reluctance to elaborate. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they reached a plateau where the trail leveled out temporarily. Murphy pointed to a ridge ahead. "Tom's place is just over that rise. Should see smoke from his chimney any minute now." Catherine's pulse quickened with anticipation and nervousness. After months of correspondence, she would finally meet the man whose words had convinced her to trust her future to him. She tried to imagine their first moments together, whether conversation would flow as easily in person as it had on paper. They crested the ridge, and Catherine's breath caught. Below them lay a small valley, pristine white, except for dark lines, where a creek cut through the snow. But instead of the cozy cabin with smoke rising from its chimney, she saw only devastation. A massive avalanche had swept down from the mountain slopes, carrying trees, boulders, and debris across half the valley floor. Where Thomas's cabin should have stood, Catherine saw only splintered timber and scattered belongings poking through the snow like grave markers. "Dear God," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Murphy brought the sled to a halt, his shoulders sagging. "I'm sorry, miss. I didn't know how to tell you gentle-like. The avalanche came down 3 weeks ago during that big storm. Tom's cabin, his mine entrance, all of it got swept away." Catherine stared at the destruction, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "And Thomas, where is Thomas?" Murphy's silence stretched too long before he finally answered. We searched for days, miss. Found pieces of the cabin scattered all over creation, some of his mining equipment, personal belongings, but Tom himself. He shook his head. Never. I found him, most likely buried somewhere under all that snow and rock. The world tilted around Catherine. She gripped the side of the sled as waves of shock and disbelief washed over her. Thomas Harrison, the man whose letters had guided her across a continent, whose dreams had become her dreams, was gone. The future she had risked everything to claim had been erased by an act of nature as sudden and final as a lightning strike. I know it's a terrible shock, Murphy said gently. If you want, I can take you back to Bitter Creek Station tonight. There's a stage back east in 3 days. Catherine barely heard him. Her gaze had fixed on something moving at the edge of the avalanche debris. A large shape was making its way across the unstable terrain with careful, deliberate steps. As it drew closer, she could see it was a massive dog, its thick reddish-brown and white coat marking it unmistakably as a St. Bernard. "Rex," she breathed. The dog had spotted their sled and was approaching with obvious recognition of Murphy. But when his intelligent brown eyes fixed on Catherine, something remarkable happened. Rex sat down in the snow and released a long, mournful howl that echoed across the valley, a sound so filled with grief and longing that tears began streaming down Catherine's face. "That's Tom's dog, all right," Murphy confirmed. "Been hanging around the Avalanche site ever since it happened. Won't leave, no matter how much food we put out down at the station, acting like he's waiting for Tom to come home." Catherine climbed down from the sled despite Murphy's protests and approached Rex slowly. The St. Bernard was enormous, easily, weighing over 150 pounds, with intelligent eyes that seemed to look straight into her soul. When she extended her hand, Rex sniffed carefully, then pressed his massive head against her palm with a gentleness that belied his size. "He knows you're Tom's bride," Murphy observed with wonder. "Dogs got sense about these things." Catherine knelt in the snow, not caring about the cold seeping through her traveling dress, and wrapped her arms around Rex's thick neck. The dog accepted her embrace with dignity, as if understanding that they shared a common loss. In his warm presence, Catherine felt the first moment of connection since arriving in this devastating landscape. "What happens to him now?" she asked, looking up at Murphy. "Figured we'd try to find someone willing to take him, but St. Bernards ain't common pets. I need lots of food, lots of space. Most folks around here got their hands full just getting." While preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Catherine studied Rex's noble face, seeing intelligence and loyalty that reminded her of Thomas's descriptions in his letters. This dog had been Thomas's constant companion and had shared his daily life in ways she never would. In some strange way, Rex represented the only tangible connection she had to the man she had traveled so far to marry. "I'll take him," she said suddenly. Murphy looked startled. "Miss, begging your pardon, but you have no place to take him. Can't exactly bring a dog that size on the stagecoach back east." Catherine stood, brushing snow from her skirts, her mind racing. Murphy was right about the practical impossibilities, but something deeper was driving her decision. She couldn't simply abandon Rex any more than she could abandon the dreams that had brought her here. Thomas owned this land, didn't he? The claim, the cabin site? Well, yes, but it's all destroyed now. Nothing left to claim. "But the legal ownership hasn't changed," Catherine pressed. "As his intended bride, I might have some rights to his property." Murphy scratched his beard thoughtfully. "That's a question for lawyers and judges, miss. Not sure how the territorial laws work in cases like this." Catherine looked back at the Avalanche site, then at Rex, who was watching her with an expression of hope that was almost human. An idea was forming, born of desperation, but taking on the shape of possibility. "Mr. Murphy, You mentioned that some of Thomas's belongings were recovered from the Avalanche. Yes, scattered all over. Some tools, personal items, papers. Most of it stored in my trading post until someone figures out what to do with it. I'd like to see those papers, and I need to understand exactly what Thomas owned here, what rights I might have. Murphy studied her with new respect. You're thinking of staying? It wasn't really a question, and Catherine realized that staying was exactly what she was considering. The practical part of her mind catalogued all the reasons it was impossible. She had limited funds, no shelter, no knowledge of mining or mountain survival. But another part, a part that had been awakening since she first read Thomas's letters, about the freedom and purpose he had found in these mountains, was pushing her toward a decision that defied logic. Thomas wrote about gold in these mountains, she said slowly, about the potential for wealth beyond anything possible back east. That potential didn't die with him. But miss, you don't know the first thing about mining, about surviving up here. This country's hard on men who've been born to it. A lady from Philadelphia might surprise you, Catherine finished. I've survived more than you might think, Mr. Murphy. I lost both parents to tuberculosis, managed our household alone. For 2 years while teaching full-time, then sold everything I owned to come here. I'm not as fragile as I might appear. Rex had been listening to this exchange with the attention of someone following every word. Now he stood and walked a few paces toward the Avalanche site, then looked back at Catherine with an expression that seemed to say, "Are you coming?" "He wants to show you something," Murphy observed with amazement. Never seen a dog act quite like that. Catherine made her decision. "Can you take me down to see Thomas's belongings? Tonight, if possible." Murphy nodded slowly. "Suppose I can do that, but miss, you need to understand what you'd be taking on. Winter up here lasts 6 months. Supply runs are irregular. The nearest doctor is 3 days' ride, and that's assuming the weather cooperates." Thomas managed it. Tom was a man who'd been mining for 15 years, knew these mountains like his own backyard. I had connections, equipment, experience. Catherine looked again at Rex, who was still watching her with patient expectation. He also had Rex. And now Rex has me. The logic was circular and probably flawed, but it felt right in a way that surprised Catherine. She had come west seeking a predetermined future with a man she knew only through letters. That future was gone, but perhaps there was another path forward, one that honored Thomas's memory while creating something entirely her own. As they loaded her trunk back onto the sled for the return journey to Bitter Creek Station, Catherine took one last look at the Avalanche site. Somewhere beneath that chaos of snow and debris lay the man whose dreams had carried her across a continent. But also buried there, she suspected, were answers about his gold claims, his discoveries, the future he had been so excited to share. With her, Rex jumped onto the sled without being invited, settling beside Catherine's trunk, as if claiming his place in whatever came next. His presence was reassuring, a link to Thomas and to possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. The return journey passed in contemplative silence as shadows lengthened across the snow-covered landscape. Catherine's mind raced with questions and half-formed plans. She would need to see Thomas's papers, understand his claims, assess what resources might be available. Most importantly, she would need to decide whether the courage that had brought her this far was sufficient for the challenges ahead. By the time they reached Bitter Creek Station, Catherine Walsh had made a fundamental decision. She would not be taking the next stagecoach back to Philadelphia. Instead, she would be staying in Montana Territory with a St. Bernard named Rex as her guide, and Thomas Harrison's legacy as her starting point for a future she would have to build entirely on her own terms. The trading post's back room smelled of leather, tobacco, and something indefinably masculine that reminded Catherine of her father's study. Jake Murphy lit a kerosene lamp, casting dancing shadows across wooden crates and barrels stacked against rough-hewn walls. Rex had followed them inside, his massive paws clicking against the plank floor as he settled near a pot-bellied stove that radiated welcome warmth. "Tom's things are in that corner," Murphy said, gesturing toward a collection of items covered by a canvas tarp. "Wasn't much we could salvage. Most everything got scattered across half the county when that mountain came down." Catherine approached the tarp with reverence, as if she were visiting a grave. When Murphy pulled away the covering, she gasped softly. The collection was heartbreakingly modest. A dented coffee pot, several books with water-damaged covers, a wooden box containing mining tools, and a leather satchel that looked relatively intact. "That satchel had his papers," Murphy explained, "kept them wrapped in oilcloth, which probably saved them from the worst of the moisture." Catherine's hands trembled as she opened the satchel. Inside, she found a treasure trove of documents that painted a picture of Thomas Harrison's life and ambitions. Mining claim certificates, hand-drawn maps of the local terrain, assay reports showing gold content in various ore samples, and a thick ledger book recording his daily activities and discoveries. But it was the personal items that brought tears to her eyes. A small daguerreotype of a middle-aged couple who must have been his parents. A pressed wildflower between the pages of a Bible. And most poignantly, a half-finished letter in his familiar handwriting addressed to her. "My dearest Catherine," the letter began, "as I write this on the evening of February 28th, I am filled with excitement about discoveries I can barely contain until your arrival. Rex and I have found something extraordinary, something that will change everything we discussed about our future together. The main vein I mentioned in my earlier letters was only the beginning." The letter ended abruptly, mid-sentence, as if Thomas had been interrupted by something urgent. Catherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain cold. February 28th would have been just days before the avalanche. "Mr. Murphy," she said slowly, "do you know anything about Thomas's recent discoveries? This letter suggests he found something significant shortly before he died." Murphy shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. "Tom was always excited about something or other. Man had more optimism than sense sometimes, if you'll pardon the saying." Catherine studied his expression carefully. In her years of teaching, she had developed a keen ability to detect when students were withholding information. Murphy was definitely hiding something. "There's more to this story, isn't there?" she pressed gently. "Something you haven't told me about what happened here." Murphy sighed heavily, pulling up a wooden crate to sit on. "Miss Walsh, there's things about Tom's death that don't quite add up. Things that might upset you further." "I need to know the truth, Mr. Murphy. Please." Rex lifted his massive head, his intelligent eyes moving between Catherine and Murphy as if he too was waiting for answers. "Well," Murphy began reluctantly, "the avalanche was natural enough. We had 3 days of unusually warm weather followed by heavy snow, exactly the conditions that trigger slides. But the timing was peculiar." "How so?" "Tom had been acting strange in the weeks before it happened, secretive-like. Usually, he'd come down to the station every week or so for supplies, always ready to chat about his progress, share a drink. But those last few weeks, he barely showed. His face, when he did come down, he was jumpy, kept looking over his shoulder." Catherine felt her pulse quicken. "Did he say what was troubling him?" "Not directly, but I heard him arguing with someone about his claim about a week before the avalanche. Voices carrying down the mountain, angry-like. Never did see who he was talking to, but it wasn't a friendly conversation." This revelation sent new questions racing through Catherine's mind. Who else knew about Thomas's mining activities? Who else had access to his claim? Murphy's expression grew even more troubled. That's where things get complicated, miss. Tom wasn't the only one interested in that particular section of mountain. There's a man named Silas Blackwood, who owns the biggest mining operation in the territory. Been buying up claims all through these mountains, consolidating them into one big enterprise. And he was interested in Thomas's land. More than interested, Blackwood's been pressuring small miners to sell for months, offering good money at first, but getting more insistent when folks refuse. Tom was one of the holdouts. Catherine absorbed this information, pieces of a disturbing puzzle beginning to form in her mind. You think this Blackwood might have had something to do with Thomas's death? Murphy held up his hands. Now, I'm not saying that. Avalanches happen naturally in these mountains, but the timing and Tom's behavior those last weeks, it all strikes me as peculiar. Catherine turned back to Thomas's papers, searching for any mention of Silas Blackwood. She found several references in his ledger, increasingly agitated notes about pressure from SB and need to secure the claim before SB makes move. One entry, dated February 25th, was particularly ominous. SB visited today with a final offer. Told him absolutely not. He seemed angry, made veiled threats about accidents that happened to stubborn miners. Rex didn't like him at all, growling. The entire time he was here. Must be more careful. Consider hiding the maps until Catherine arrives. Mr. Murphy, Catherine said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I need to understand exactly what Thomas discovered. These papers reference maps and extraordinary findings, but I don't see the details. Murphy glanced around nervously, as if checking for eavesdroppers. Tom mentioned finding something big shortly before he died. Wouldn't say exactly what, but he was excited enough to start talking about hiring additional miners, expanding operations. Said he'd struck something that would make him rich beyond imagining. And these maps he mentioned hiding. Never found any maps among his belongings. Searched everywhere we could safely reach in the avalanche debris. Either they're buried too deep to recover, or someone else has them, Catherine finished. Rex suddenly stood, his ears pricked forward, a low rumble emanating from his chest. Murphy immediately extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Someone's outside, Murphy whispered. Rex hears them before any human would. They waited in tense silence. Catherine could hear her own heartbeat and the soft whisper of Rex's breathing, but nothing else. After several long minutes, Rex relaxed, settling back down with a soft huff. Murphy relit the lamp cautiously. Probably just the wind. But Rex has saved more than one miner from unwelcome visitors. Dogs have instincts that border on the supernatural. Catherine was beginning to understand why Thomas had valued Rex so highly. St. Bernard wasn't just a companion, he was a guardian, protector, and guide rolled into one magnificent animal. Mr. Murphy, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. I'll try, miss. Do you think Thomas's death was really an accident? Murphy was quiet for a long time, studying her face in the lamplight. Finally, he spoke. I think Tom stumbled onto something valuable enough that certain people would go to great lengths to get their hands on it. Whether that included murder, I can't say for certain. But I can tell you that Silas Blackwood showed up at the Avalanche, site within hours of it happening, supposedly to help with rescue efforts. Spent a lot of time poking around in areas where a rescuer had no business being. Catherine felt a cold certainty settling in her stomach. Thomas hadn't just died in a natural disaster. He had been eliminated because of what he had discovered. And now she was the only person with potential claim to whatever that discovery might be. Where is this Silas Blackwood now? She asked. Runs his operation out of a compound about 20 miles north of here. Big place. Employs maybe 50 men, processes more from claims all over the territory. Not the kind of man you want to cross, miss. Catherine returned to Thomas's ledger, reading more carefully now. She found references to specific locations, geological formations, and ore samples that painted a picture of systematic exploration. Thomas had been methodical in his approach, documenting everything with the precision of someone who understood the value of detailed records. One entry caught her attention. Rex led me to the hidden entrance today. Dogs seem to know these mountains better than any human. The vein continues deeper than I initially thought, possibly connecting to the larger system I theorized about. If my calculations are correct, this could be the mother lode that prospectors have been seeking for decades. Hidden entrance, Catherine murmured. Mr. Murphy, did Thomas ever mention finding cave systems or underground passages in his mining area? Murphy's eyebrows rose. Not to me directly, but these mountains are riddled with natural caves, limestone formations, old lava tubes, places where water carved out passages over thousands of years. Miners sometimes stumble onto them when they're following veins. Catherine studied Rex, who was watching her with intelligent attention. And Rex knew about these places? Dogs got a sense for underground spaces that humans don't possess. Tom always said Rex could smell water, minerals, even air movement from cave systems. Used to joke that the dog was a better prospector than most men. A plan was beginning to form in Catherine's mind, dangerous and probably foolish, but the only path forward she could see. Mr. Murphy, I want to go back to the Avalanche site tomorrow, with Rex. Murphy looked alarmed. Miss, that's not safe. The ground's still unstable, and if Blackwood's men are watching the area, then I need to get there before they do, Catherine interrupted. Thomas hid something important, and Rex might be the only one who knows where to find it. But even if you found whatever Tom discovered, what then? You can't work a mine alone, especially if you're up against someone like Blackwood. Catherine had been wondering the same thing, but looking at Rex, she felt a strange confidence building. Thomas managed to work his claim with just Rex as a partner. Maybe that's enough to start with. Murphy shook his head. Tom had years of experience and knew these mountains like his own backyard. You're a schoolteacher from Philadelphia. I'm a woman who has nothing left to lose, Catherine corrected. And I have Rex. As if understanding his name, Rex moved closer to Catherine, pressing his warm bulk against her leg. The contact was reassuring, a reminder that she wasn't completely alone in this hostile territory. There's something else you should know, Murphy said reluctantly. Tom left a will with the territorial courthouse in Helena. Basic document, leaving everything to his next of kin, but he also filed papers about your intended marriage, establishing your claim to his property in case something happened to him. Catherine felt a surge of gratitude toward the man she would never meet. Even in planning for disaster, Thomas had tried to protect her interests. So legally I do have rights to his claim. Assuming the will stands up to challenge, yes. But Blackwood's got lawyers and influence. He might find ways to contest it, especially if he can prove the claim was abandoned or not properly maintained. Then I need to establish my presence there as quickly as possible. Murphy studied her with a mixture of admiration and concern. Miss Walsh, I've lived in these mountains for 20 years, seen strong men broken by this country, families destroyed by isolation and hardship. What you're considering, it's not just dangerous, it's nearly impossible. Catherine looked around the room at Thomas's scattered possessions, the remnants of a life cut short just as it was reaching its greatest promise. Then she looked at Rex, whose steady gaze seemed to offer both challenge and support. Mr. Murphy, what's the difference between nearly impossible and completely impossible? Murphy smiled despite his worries. About the width of a prayer, I'd say. Then that's what I'll work with. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the trading post's windows and doors. Catherine realized that her entire life had changed in the span of a few hours. This morning, she had been a mail-order bride traveling to meet her intended husband. Tonight, she was a potential mining heiress, planning to stake a claim against forces that had possibly killed the man she had come to marry. The transformation should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a strange exhilaration, as if she were finally becoming the person she was meant to be. Thomas's letters had spoken of how the mountains changed people, stripping away pretense and revealing true character. Catherine was beginning to understand what he meant. "I'll take you back up to the claim site tomorrow," Murphy said finally. "But we go armed, we go early, and at the first sign of trouble we get out, understood?" Catherine nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Murphy. I won't forget your kindness." Rex had been listening to this entire conversation with the attention of someone following every word. Now he stood and walked to the door, looking back at Catherine with an expression that seemed to say the real adventure was just beginning. Catherine gathered Thomas's papers, organizing them carefully in the leather satchel. Tomorrow, she would return to the Avalanche site with the only guide who truly knew where Thomas had hidden his greatest discovery. Tonight, she would study every document, every map fragment, every clue that might help her understand what she was really searching for. As Murphy banked the fire for the night and Rex settled beside the stove, Catherine felt the weight of her decision settling around her like a heavy blanket. She was committed now to a path that defied every reasonable expectation, trusting her future to a dog's instincts and a dead man's dreams. But for the first time since leaving Philadelphia, Catherine Walsh felt truly alive. Dawn painted the mountain. Peaks rose gold as Catherine prepared for the journey back to Thomas's claim. She had slept fitfully in Murphy's spare room, her dreams filled with avalanches and mysterious maps, Rex's protective presence, the only thing that had brought her any peace during the long night. Now, dressed in her most practical clothing with Thomas's leather satchel secured across her shoulder, she felt ready to face whatever secrets the mountains might reveal. Murphy emerged from his trading post, carrying a rifle and a pack loaded with supplies. "The weather's holding clear," he announced, though his expression remained troubled. "Should give us good visibility up at the site." Rex had positioned himself beside the sled, his massive frame alert and ready. St. Bernard seemed to understand the importance of this expedition. His intelligent brown eyes focused on the mountain trail ahead with an intensity that was almost human. "Before we go," Catherine said, "I need to understand something. You mentioned that Silas Blackwood arrived at the Avalanche site very quickly after it happened. How quickly?" Murphy checked his rifle's loading mechanism before answering. "Too quickly, if you ask me. The slide happened during the night, around 3 in the morning, based on when folks in town heard the rumbling. Blackwood and his men showed up before noon the same day. Could he have been in the area already? That's what bothers me. Blackwood's compound is 20 miles north, rough terrain. Even pushing hard, it should have taken him the better part of a day to reach the site after getting word. Unless he was already nearby," Catherine finished, understanding the implication. They loaded onto the sled in contemplative silence, Rex settling between them like a furry mountain of loyalty. As Murphy urged the horses forward, Catherine noticed movement in the tree line above the settlement. A lone rider was watching them from the shadows, too distant to identify but close enough to make her uneasy. "Mr. Murphy," she said quietly. "We're being observed." Murphy followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. "Could be one of Blackwood's scouts. Man keeps eyes on everything that happens in these mountains." He snapped the reins, encouraging the horses to move faster. All the more reason to get this done quickly. The trail to Thomas's claim seemed different in daylight, less ominous, but more revealing of the true challenges ahead. Catherine could see evidence of previous avalanches scored into the mountainsides, testimony to the violent forces that shaped this landscape. She began to understand why Thomas had written so respectfully about the mountain's power, the way they demanded humility from anyone who dared to make a living in their shadows. Rex rode with remarkable composure for such a large animal, his gaze constantly scanning their surroundings. Occasionally, he would lift his massive head and sniff the air, processing information that humans couldn't detect. Once, he released a low whine and looked pointedly at a ridge to their left. Murphy immediately pulled the horses to a halt, following Rex's gaze. After several tense minutes, a small herd of deer emerged from the trees, moving gracefully across the snow. Murphy relaxed, but Catherine noticed that Rex continued watching the ridge even after the deer had passed. "He's remarkable," she murmured, stroking Rex's thick coat. Thomas wrote that he had almost supernatural instincts, but I didn't understand what that meant until now. "Tom used to say Rex could smell trouble 3 valleys away," Murphy agreed. "Dog saved his life more than once, warned him about unstable ground, approaching storms, even claimed jumpers trying to sneak up on his camp." Catherine felt a growing appreciation for St. Bernard's capabilities. If Rex had been Thomas's partner in all his explorations, then the dog might indeed know secrets that no human had ever learned. They reached the Avalanche site as the sun crested the eastern peaks, flooding the devastated valley with brilliant light. The scene was even more sobering in full daylight, the massive scale of destruction clearly visible from their vantage point on the ridge above. But Rex was already moving, climbing down from the sled with purposeful determination. He began picking his way across the debris field with careful steps, testing each foothold before committing his full weight. His path seemed random to Catherine, but Murphy was watching with growing excitement. "He's following something," Murphy said. "See how he keeps stopping to sniff? He's tracking a scent trail." Catherine grabbed Thomas's satchel and followed, stepping carefully in Rex's massive paw prints. The footing was treacherous, loose rocks and snow-covered timber that could shift without warning. But Rex seemed to know exactly where it was safe to step, leading them on a winding route through the chaos. They had been following Rex for nearly an hour when he suddenly stopped beside a pile of boulders that looked no different from dozens of others scattered across the site. The St. Bernard began digging in the snow with his powerful front paws, whining softly with excitement. "He's found something," Catherine said, kneeling beside him to help clear away the snow and debris. Her gloved hands struck something hard and metallic. Working together, she and Murphy uncovered a small iron strongbox, its surface dented but intact. The lock had been smashed, probably by falling rocks, but the contents appeared to have survived. Catherine's heart raced as she opened the box. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather, were the maps Thomas had mentioned in his ledger. Detailed drawings of the local terrain, marking mine shafts, ore samples, and geological formations. But most intriguingly, one map showed a series of underground passages, hand-labeled in Thomas's careful script. "Cave system," Murphy breathed, studying the map over Catherine's shoulder. "Tom found a whole network of natural caves running through this mountain." Rex had been watching their discovery with obvious satisfaction, his tail wagging slowly. Now, he moved to another spot about 20 feet away and began digging again, this time uncovering a canvas bundle containing mining tools and sample bags filled with ore. Catherine examined one of the ore samples in the morning light. Even with her limited knowledge, she could see the telltale glint of gold threaded through the dark rock. But this wasn't just any gold ore. The metal content appeared remarkably high, far richer than anything she had seen in Thomas's earlier. "Samples! This is extraordinary," she whispered. "The concentration is incredible." Murphy nodded grimly. "Now I understand why Blackwood was so interested in Tom's claim. If there's a vein producing ore like this, it could be worth a fortune." Rex had moved to a third location, this time uncovering what appeared to be a journal wrapped in waterproof material. Catherine opened it carefully, finding Thomas's detailed notes about his recent discoveries. The final entry, dated February 27th, just one day before his interrupted letter to her, was particularly revealing. Rex led me to the main chamber today. The vein extends much deeper than I initially calculated, possibly connecting to a deposit that spans multiple claims in the valley. If my estimates are correct, this could be one of the largest gold finds in Montana Territory. Must be careful about who learns of this. Blackwood has been asking too many questions, and his men have been seen near my claim boundaries, have hidden the evidence in multiple locations that only Rex knows. If something happens to me, the dog will be the key to recovering everything. Catherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Thomas had known he was in danger and had taken precautions to protect his discovery. And now Rex was methodically retrieving the hidden evidence, as if following instructions only he understood. "There's more," Murphy said, pointing to another area where Rex was now digging. "Dog's not finished showing us what Tom hid." This time, Rex uncovered a wooden box containing official claim documents, surveyors' reports, and correspondence with territorial mining authorities. But most importantly, Catherine found a detailed letter addressed to my beloved Catherine and dated February 28th, the day before Thomas died. Her hands shook as she read Thomas's final message. "My dearest Catherine, if you are reading this, then Rex has done exactly what I trained him to do. I pray this means you have arrived safely, though circumstances have obviously not unfolded as we planned. The dog knows the location of the main chamber, the richest deposit I have ever encountered. But more than that, he knows the safe routes through the cave system, the places where the mountain is stable and the places where it is not. Trust Rex completely. His instincts have never failed me. The future we dreamed of is still possible, but it will require courage and determination beyond anything I asked of you in my letters. I believe you possess both qualities, or I would never have invited you to share this life. The gold is real, Catherine, enough to secure our independence for generations. But Silas Blackwood knows I have found something valuable, and he will stop at nothing to claim it for himself. Be careful whom you trust. Rex will protect you as he protected me, but even his remarkable abilities have limits. All my love and hopes for your safety, Thomas." Catherine wiped away tears as she finished reading. Thomas had somehow foreseen his own death, had prepared for it by training Rex to guide her to their shared future. The responsibility felt overwhelming, but also deeply moving. "We need to see this main chamber," she said, looking at Rex. "Can you show us where Thomas found the gold?" Rex stood immediately, his tail wagging with enthusiasm. He began moving toward the far end of the valley, where the avalanche damage was less severe. Murphy gathered the recovered items, securing them in his pack. "Miss Walsh," he said seriously, "if we're going into unknown cave systems, we need to be prepared for anything. Underground passages can be dangerous even under the best circumstances." Catherine nodded, understanding the risks but feeling compelled to follow where Rex led. They had come too far to turn back now, and Thomas's final letter had made it clear that only Rex knew the secrets that could secure her future. St. Bernard led them to a cluster of large boulders that appeared to have been tumbled together by some ancient geological event. To Catherine's eyes, it looked like just another pile of rocks. But Rex squeezed between two massive stones, disappearing from view before emerging again to look back at them expectantly. Murphy investigated the opening, testing its stability. "It's a natural passage," he announced. "Looks like it goes back quite a ways into the mountain." Catherine lit the lantern Murphy had brought, adjusting the wick for maximum illumination. The passage was narrow but tall enough for them to walk upright, carved by thousands of years of water flow through the limestone formation. Rex moved confidently through the darkness, his white and brown coat visible in their lantern light. The passage wound steadily upward, occasionally opening into larger chambers before narrowing again. Catherine could hear the distant sound of running water, suggesting an underground stream system. After perhaps 20 minutes of careful progress, they emerged into a vast chamber that took Catherine's breath away. Their lantern light revealed soaring stone formations, underground pools reflecting their illumination like mirrors, and along one wall a vein of quartz shot through with gold that glittered like stars in the darkness. "Dear God," Murphy whispered. "Tom wasn't exaggerating. This is the mother lode." Catherine approached the vein, running her fingers along the exposed gold. The metal content was even richer than the samples they had found outside, so concentrated that large nuggets were visible to the naked eye. This wasn't just a profitable mining claim. It was a treasure that could fund an empire. Rex sat down beside the vein, his expression radiating pride and satisfaction. He had successfully completed the mission Thomas had trained him for, leading Catherine to the discovery that could secure her future in the Montana Territory. But as Catherine marveled at the underground treasure, Murphy was examining other aspects of the chamber. "Miss Walsh," he said urgently, "we're not the first people to visit this chamber recently." Catherine turned to see what had captured his attention. In the soft earth near one of the underground pools, she could see boot prints, far too fresh to have been made by Thomas. "Blackwood's men," Murphy said grimly. "They've been here, probably searching for exactly what we just found." Rex immediately moved to the chamber entrance, his ears pricked forward in alert attention. His low growl indicated that their privacy was about to be interrupted. "Someone's coming," Catherine whispered, extinguishing the lantern, plunging them into complete darkness. They waited in tense silence, listening to the sound of approaching footsteps echoing through the passage. Multiple people, moving with the confidence of familiarity with the terrain. Rex pressed close to Catherine, his massive bulk providing both comfort and protection. In the darkness, she could feel his muscles tensed for action, ready to defend her against whatever threat was approaching. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the sound of voices and the flicker of torchlight beginning to illuminate the chamber entrance. Catherine realized that her quest to claim Thomas's legacy was about to face its first real test. Hidden in the darkness with only Rex and Murphy as allies, she prepared to confront the forces that had likely killed the man she had traveled so far to marry. The gold glittering around them was worth a fortune, but Catherine was beginning to understand that claiming it might cost everything she had. The torchlight grew brighter as voices echoed through the cave system, harsh and commanding. Catherine pressed herself against the cold stone wall, Rex's warm bulk beside her, providing the only comfort in their precarious situation. Murphy had positioned himself near a natural stone formation that would provide cover if shooting started. "I know you're in there," a gravelly voice called out, the words bouncing off the chamber walls. "Saw your tracks in the snow outside. No point hiding." Catherine's heart hammered as she recognized the authority in that voice. This wasn't some random claim jumper or curious prospector. These men had come here with purpose, knowing exactly what they would find. Rex's growl rumbled so low it was more felt than heard, a warning that whoever was approaching posed serious danger. St. Bernard's muscles were coiled for action, but he remained perfectly still, waiting for Catherine's signal. "Might as well come out peaceful-like," the voice continued. "We're not here to hurt anyone. I just want to talk about business." Murphy leaned close to Catherine's ear, his whisper barely audible. That Silas Blackwood himself recognized his voice. The knowledge sent ice through Catherine's veins. The man who had likely murdered Thomas was now standing at the entrance to the treasure chamber, speaking as if this were a casual business meeting. "We know you found Harrison's maps," Blackwood called out. "Smart of the old boy to hide them, but not smart enough. That dog has been leading folks right to them all." Weak, Catherine felt Rex stiffen beside her. The revelation that they had been watched, that Rex's loyalty to Thomas had been turned against him, filled her with rage and determination. "Miss Walsh," Blackwood's voice took on a mockingly polite tone. "That is you in there, isn't it? Thomas." Harrison's mail-order bride? Must say, you're more resourceful than expected. Most Eastern ladies would have taken the first stage back home after seeing that avalanche. Catherine made a decision that surprised even herself. Standing up slowly, she moved toward the chamber entrance, Rex immediately flanking her left side. "Mr. Blackwood, I presume." The torchlight revealed a man in his 50s, well-dressed despite the rough mountain setting, with intelligent eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. He was flanked by 4 miners, all armed, but their weapons remained lowered in a show of false civility. Silas. "Blackwood," he confirmed with a slight bow. "Owner of Blackwood Mining Enterprises. Sorry we're meeting under such dramatic circumstances." "Are you sorry about the circumstances that killed Thomas Harrison as well?" Catherine asked directly, her voice steadier than she felt. Blackwood's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Tragic accident. Avalanches are unfortunately common in these mountains. Poor Tom just happened to be in the wrong place when nature decided to rearrange the landscape." "How convenient for you," Catherine replied. "Especially since you'd been pressuring him to sell his claim. Business is business, Miss Walsh. I make offers to small miners because consolidation benefits everyone. Economy of scale, shared resources, professional management. Tom was just too stubborn to see the advantages." Murphy emerged from the shadows, his rifle held ready but not directly threatening. "Funny how you managed to reach the avalanche site so quickly, Silas, almost like you knew it was going to happen." Blackwood's men shifted slightly, hands moving closer to their weapons, but Blackwood himself remained calm, even smiling slightly. "Jake, Murphy," he said with apparent pleasure. "Still running that little trading post, I see. It must be difficult competing with my company's stores." "Not so difficult that I need to resort to murder," Murphy replied bluntly. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from their torches. Catherine watched Blackwood's face carefully, looking for any sign of guilt or defensiveness. Instead, she saw calculation, a man weighing his options and the potential consequences of different actions. "That's a serious accusation, Murphy," Blackwood said finally. "Hope you can back it up with evidence." "We have Thomas's journal," Catherine interjected. "Detailed records of your threats, your pressure tactics, your anger when he refused to sell." Blackwood nodded thoughtfully. "I'm sure Tom wrote many things in his journal. Emotional responses to business pressures, perhaps some paranoid suspicions. But writing accusations and proving murder are entirely different matters." Rex had been studying Blackwood throughout this exchange, his intelligent eyes never leaving the man's face. Suddenly, St. Bernard took 2 steps forward and released a sound Catherine had never heard before. A deep, aggressive bark that echoed through the chamber like thunder. Blackwood actually stepped backward, his composure cracking for the first time. "Control that animal," he snapped to his men. "Rex doesn't like you," Catherine observed. "Thomas wrote that the dog could sense character, that he was never wrong about people." "I'm not particularly concerned with the dog's opinion," Blackwood replied, but Catherine noticed he made no move to approach closer. "You should be," Murphy said. "Rex was with Tom the day you visited his claim. The dog remembers everything." This seemed to genuinely surprise Blackwood. His eyes narrowed as he studied Rex with new attention, as if reassessing a threat he hadn't previously considered. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Blackwood asked. "I'm suggesting," Catherine said, finding her courage, "that Rex witnessed whatever happened between you and Thomas, and while he can't testify in court, he can certainly identify the man responsible for his master's death." Blackwood laughed, but the sound was forced. "This is ridiculous. You're talking about a dog like he's some kind of witness." "Mountain dogs are different from city pets," Murphy explained. "They develop intelligence and loyalty that goes beyond anything most people understand. Rex protected Tom for years, learned his routines, his friends, his enemies, As if to emphasize the point, Rex moved to position himself directly between Catherine and Blackwood, his massive frame radiating protective authority. "Very touching," Blackwood said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "But we're not here to discuss canine psychology. We're here to negotiate a business arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Catherine asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Simple. You sign over Tom's claim to my company, I provide you with enough money to return east and start fresh. Everyone benefits, except Thomas, who's dead. Tom's unfortunate death doesn't change the practical realities," Blackwood replied coldly. "You're a single woman with no mining experience in hostile territory. You can't possibly work this claim alone." "I'm not alone," Catherine said, placing her hand on Rex's massive head, "and I'm not signing anything." Blackwood's expression hardened. "Miss Walsh, I'm trying to be reasonable here, but my patience has limits." "So does mine," Catherine replied, surprised by her own boldness. "And I've seen enough to know that Thomas was right to refuse your offers," one of Blackwood's men whispered, something urgent in his ear. The mining baron nodded, then looked back at Catherine with renewed calculation. "My associate reminds me that territorial law regarding abandoned claims can be somewhat flexible. If the original owner is deceased and the property isn't actively worked, other parties can file competing claims. Thomas's will establishes my legal rights," Catherine said. "Wills can be contested, especially when the inheritor lacks the resources to maintain the property. Legal battles take time and money, Miss Walsh. Do you have enough of either?" Catherine felt the trap closing around her. Blackwood was right about her limited resources, and she was beginning to understand the extent of his influence in the territory. A protracted legal fight would favor the man with established connections and deep pockets. But Rex pressed closer to her, his warmth and presence reminding her that she had advantages Blackwood couldn't buy or intimidate. "I have what Thomas left." "Me," she said firmly. "His maps, his knowledge, and his partner." "Partner?" Blackwood looked confused. "Rex," Catherine explained. "Thomas trained him to navigate these cave systems, to find the richest deposits, to protect what they discovered together. That's worth more than all your lawyers and influence." Blackwood's expression suggested he was beginning to take Rex's capabilities more seriously. "A dog can't work a mine. No, but he can guide those who can. And he can distinguish between friend and enemy." As if to demonstrate, Rex moved toward one of Blackwood's men who had been slowly shifting position to flank them. The St. Bernard didn't attack, but his warning growl was unmistakable. The man immediately stepped back to his original position. "Remarkable," Blackwood murmured, watching Rex with new interest. "Tom really did train him, didn't he?" "For years," Murphy confirmed. "Dogs know these mountains better than any human." "Alive!" Catherine could see wheels turning in Blackwood's mind, recognizing Rex's value as more than just a guard animal. St. Bernard represented knowledge that couldn't be bought or stolen, only earned through trust and loyalty. "Perhaps we can find a different arrangement," Blackwood said slowly. "A partnership that benefits everyone." "What kind of partnership?" Catherine asked suspiciously. "You maintain legal ownership of the claim, providing legitimacy. My company provides equipment, labor, and expertise for extraction and processing. We split the profits according to contribution." "And what happens to Rex in this arrangement?" "The dog would remain with you naturally. His knowledge of the cave systems would be valuable to our operations." Catherine studied Blackwood's face, trying to determine if this offer represented genuine compromise or another form of manipulation. The man was clearly intelligent and ruthless, but he was also pragmatic enough to recognize when direct coercion wasn't working. "I need time to consider your proposal," she said finally. "Of course, but don't take too long, Miss Walsh. Winter's coming, and these mountains can be unforgiving to those who aren't properly prepared." The veiled threat was clear. Catherine had until winter to make a decision or face the consequences of trying. To survive alone in the Montana wilderness. One more thing, Blackwood added as he prepared to leave. That journal you mentioned, Tom's records of our conversations. I'd be interested in purchasing it for sentimental value. Name your price? It's not for sale, Catherine replied immediately. Everything's for sale, Miss Walsh. It's just a matter of finding the right price. After Blackwood and his men departed, Catherine sank down beside Rex, the adrenaline leaving. Her shaky and exhausted, St. Bernard nuzzled her gently, offering comfort in his own magnificent way. That went better than expected, Murphy said, though his expression remained troubled. Did it? He still wants the claim, and now he knows about the journal and the maps, but he also knows he can't simply take them. Rex changes the equation. Dog's loyalty can't be bought or threatened. Catherine looked around the treasure chamber, seeing it now not just as a source of wealth, but as the center of a battle for her future. Blackwood's offer of partnership might be the only practical solution, but accepting it would mean trusting the man who had likely murdered Thomas. Rex moved to the golden vein and sat down, his position clearly stating his opinion. This treasure belonged to Thomas, and by extension to Catherine. St. Bernard would protect it and her, regardless of the odds against them. What do you think, Rex? Catherine asked softly. Do we trust Silas Blackwood? Rex's response was immediate and unmistakable. He turned his back on the chamber entrance where Blackwood had stood and pressed his muzzle against Catherine's hand, his choice clearly made. Catherine smiled for the first time since arriving in Montana territory. She had found more than gold in this mountain chamber. She had found a partner whose loyalty was beyond question and whose knowledge could give her the independence she had never dared dream of. Back in Philadelphia, the battle for Thomas Harrison's legacy was just beginning, but Catherine Walsh was no longer fighting alone. 3 days after their confrontation with Blackwood in the treasure chamber, Catherine stood outside the territorial courthouse in Helena, Montana, clutching Thomas's will and claim documents. The morning air carried the scent of wood smoke and the promise of autumn, a reminder that winter would arrive sooner than she was prepared for. Rex waited patiently beside her, his massive presence drawing curious stares from passers-by, unaccustomed to seeing such a magnificent St. Bernard in the territorial capital. Judge William Harrison, no relation to Thomas, despite the shared surname, examined the documents with meticulous care. His office was sparse but dignified, law books lining the walls and a large territorial map marking mining claims in different colored pins. Catherine had traveled here seeking legal confirmation of her rights, but the judge's expression suggested complications she hadn't anticipated. Miss Walsh, Judge Harrison said finally, removing his spectacles to clean them slowly. These documents appear to be in order, but I'm afraid the situation has become considerably more complex since Mr. Thomas Harrison's death. Catherine felt her stomach drop. In what way, Your Honor? Silas Blackwood filed a formal challenge to the will yesterday morning. He's claiming that the deceased had entered into preliminary negotiations to sell the claim to Blackwood Mining Enterprises, and that your arrival constitutes interference with an existing business agreement. That's impossible, Catherine protested. Thomas's letters to me, right up until his death, made no mention of any intention to sell. In fact, his final writings specifically warned me about Blackwood's pressure tactics. The judge consulted another document on his desk. Mr. Blackwood has presented what he claims are preliminary contracts and correspondence indicating serious negotiations were underway. He's also filed an affidavit stating that the claim has been abandoned since Harrison's death, making it subject to new filing under territorial mining law. Catherine's mind raced. Blackwood was using the legal system as another weapon, creating false documentation to support his claims. Your Honor, I have Thomas's journal documenting his refusal to sell and his concerns about Blackwood's increasing threats. I'd like to examine that journal, Judge Harrison said. However, I must inform you that Mr. Blackwood has also filed for an emergency injunction preventing any mining activity on the disputed claim until ownership is resolved. The trap was becoming clear. Blackwood couldn't simply steal the claim, but he could tie it up in legal proceedings, while winter made any mining operations impossible. By spring, Catherine's resources would be exhausted, and she would have no choice but to accept whatever terms he offered. How long would such legal proceedings take? Catherine asked, though she dreaded the answer. Could be months, possibly longer if Blackwood's attorneys find ways to complicate matters. Territorial courts aren't known for their speed, especially during winter when travel between settlements becomes difficult. Rex had been lying quietly beside Catherine's chair, but now he stood and moved to the window, his ears pricked forward in alert attention. St. Bernard's body language suggested he had detected something concerning outside. Your Honor, Catherine said, what if I could prove that Blackwood was directly responsible for Thomas's death? Would that affect the legal proceedings? Judge Harrison's eyebrows rose. That would be a criminal matter, Miss Walsh. Do you have evidence of foul play? Catherine hesitated. Rex's obvious recognition of Blackwood was compelling to her, but she doubted it would constitute legal evidence. I have strong suspicions based on the timing of events and witness testimony about Blackwood's threats. Suspicions aren't sufficient. For criminal charges, I'm afraid. You would need concrete evidence, witnesses, physical proof, something that could convince a jury beyond reasonable doubt. Rex suddenly released a low growl, his attention fixed on something outside the courthouse. Catherine followed his gaze and saw two of Blackwood's men lounging against a building across the street, clearly watching the courthouse entrance. It seems Mr. Blackwood is keeping close tabs on our proceedings, Catherine observed. Judge Harrison followed her gaze, his expression darkening. I don't appreciate intimidation tactics in my jurisdiction, Miss Walsh. However, standing on a public street isn't illegal, even if the intent is obvious. Catherine made a decision that surprised even herself. Your Honor, I'd like to request a formal hearing on this matter. I want Blackwood to present his evidence publicly under oath. That's certainly your right, though I should warn you that Blackwood has excellent legal representation. Are you prepared to match his resources in court? I may not have his resources, but I have the truth, and I have evidence that he doesn't know about. Rex moved back to Catherine's side, pressing his warm bulk against her leg in a gesture of support. St. Bernard's loyalty was absolute, and Catherine was beginning to understand that Rex himself might be the key to exposing Blackwood's crimes. Very well, Judge Harrison said. I'll schedule a formal hearing for 1 week from today. Both parties will present their evidence, and I'll make a determination about the claim's rightful ownership. As Catherine left the courthouse, she noticed Blackwood's men immediately straightening from their casual positions. One of them disappeared around a corner, undoubtedly to report on her activities. The other maintained his surveillance, following at a discreet distance, as she and Rex made their way through Helena's streets. Catherine had arranged to meet Murphy at the Territorial Surveyor's office, hoping to find additional documentation about Thomas's claim boundaries and mineral rights. The surveyor, an elderly man named Peterson, had known Thomas personally and greeted Catherine with genuine sympathy. Tom was a good man, Peterson said, pulling out detailed maps of the mining district. Honest, hard-working, never tried to encroach on other folks' claims. Real shame what happened to him. Mr. Peterson, Catherine said, in your professional opinion, was Thomas's claim valuable enough to justify the kind of pressure Blackwood was applying? Peterson studied the maps thoughtfully. Well now, that depends on what Tom found in those final weeks. He came by here about a month before the avalanche, asking about underground water rights and cave system regulations. Seemed excited about something, but wouldn't say exactly what. Underground water rights? Territories have specific laws about subterranean resources, Peterson explained. If you find underground streams, natural chambers, mineral deposits that extend beyond your surface claim boundaries, there's legal procedures for expanding your rights. Catherine felt a surge of understanding. Thomas had been preparing to legally expand his claim based on the cave system Rex had shown them. That would explain why Blackwood had acted so desperately to prevent Thomas from filing the paperwork. Did Thomas file any applications for expanded rights? She asked. Peterson checked his records carefully. Nothing on file here, but he did request the proper forms. Said he needed to do additional surveying before submitting anything official. Murphy joined them at that moment, his expression grim. Catherine, we've got problems. Word's getting around town that Blackwood's offering substantial rewards for anyone who can provide information about your activities. What kind of information? Where you're staying, who you're talking to, what documents you might have. He's also spreading rumors that you're not Tom's legitimate heir, that you're some kind of confident woman trying to steal a valuable claim. Catherine felt anger rising. Blackwood wasn't content with legal maneuvering. He was trying to destroy her reputation and isolate her from potential allies. There's more, Murphy continued. Some of his men were seen near my trading post this morning, asking pointed questions about what Tom might have hidden there. I don't think Bitter Creek Station is safe for you anymore. Peterson looked alarmed. Blackwood's reaching this far? That man's getting too big for his britches. Where can I stay while preparing for the hearing? Catherine asked. I need somewhere Blackwood's influence doesn't reach. There's an old prospector named Dutch Kowalski who's got a cabin about 15 miles south of here, Peterson suggested. Independent as they come, never had any dealings with Blackwood's company, might be willing to help if Murphy vouches for you. Rex had been exploring Peterson's office, his keen nose investigating corners and cabinets. Suddenly, he stopped beside a particular filing cabinet and released an excited whine. What's he found? Peterson asked, curious about St. Bernard's behavior. Catherine opened the drawer Rex had indicated, finding files organized by the claim owner. Thomas Harrison's file was thicker than most, containing not just the original claim documents, but supplementary surveys and mineral reports. I remember now, Peterson said. Tom brought these in just before he died, asking me to keep copies safe. Said he was worried about his cabin's security. Catherine examined the papers with growing excitement. Thomas had indeed been preparing to file for expanded mineral rights based on the cave system. The surveys showed underground passages extending well beyond his original claim boundaries, potentially encompassing territory that Blackwood had been trying to acquire from other small miners. This changes everything, she breathed. Thomas wasn't just protecting his own claim, he was positioned to block Blackwood's consolidation of the entire valley. Murphy whistled low. No wonder Blackwood was desperate to stop him. If Tom had filed these papers, it would have tied up Blackwood's expansion plans for years. And now I can file them, Catherine realized. As Thomas's legal heir, I have the right to complete his applications. Peterson nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly right. These surveys are valid. The mineral samples are documented. Everything Tom needed to expand his claim is right here. But even as Catherine felt hope rising, Rex moved to the office window and resumed his alert posture. St. Bernard's warning came just as they heard horses approaching outside. "Company," Murphy said grimly, checking his rifle. Through the window they could see Blackwood himself, arriving with 6 armed men. The mining baron dismounted with confident authority, his expensive coat and polished boots marking him as a man, accustomed to getting his way through wealth and intimidation. "Mr. Peterson," Blackwood called out as he approached the office door, "I believe you have documents that belong to my company." Peterson stepped outside to confront Blackwood directly. "All the documents in my office belong to their rightful claim holders, Silas. You got no business here." "I have every business here," Blackwood replied smoothly. "Miss Walsh is in possession of materials obtained under false pretenses. I'm here to retrieve company property." "What company property?" Catherine demanded, emerging from the office with Rex beside her. Blackwood's confidence faltered slightly when he saw St. Bernard, but he quickly recovered. "Those surveys and mineral reports were conducted under preliminary agreement with my company. Thomas Harrison was working as our contractor when he died. The lie was so bold it took Catherine's breath away. That's completely false. These are Thomas's personal surveys of his own claim." "Prove it," Blackwood challenged. "Show me documentation that Tom was working independently rather than under contract to Blackwood Mining." Catherine realized the trap. Without witnesses to contradict Blackwood's claims, it became a matter of competing stories, and Blackwood's resources gave him the advantage in any prolonged legal battle. But Rex had different ideas about justice. The St. Bernard moved forward until he was directly between Catherine and Blackwood, his massive frame radiating protective authority. Then, to everyone's surprise, Rex sat down and released a series of sharp, commanding barks that echoed through the street. "What's wrong with that dog?" one of Blackwood's men asked nervously. "Rex remembers you," Catherine said with sudden understanding. "He's telling everyone exactly what kind of man you are." Rex continued his vocal protest, his barks drawing curious onlookers from nearby businesses. Soon, a small crowd had gathered, watching the confrontation with interest. "Control that animal," Blackwood snapped, but his words lacked conviction. St. Bernard's obvious hostility was undermining his carefully maintained image of respectability. "I can't control Rex's opinions," Catherine replied. "He judges people by their actions, and apparently he doesn't approve of yours." An elderly woman in the gathering crowd spoke up. "That's Tom Harrison's dog, isn't it? Heard that animal was devoted to Tom, never left his side." "Rex was with Thomas every day," Murphy confirmed, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Dog would know who meant his master harm." Blackwood's men were shifting uncomfortably, aware that public opinion was turning against them. Rex's continued barking was drawing more people, creating exactly the kind of scene Blackwood preferred to avoid. "This isn't over, Miss Walsh," Blackwood said, mounting his horse. "The hearing will determine who has rightful claim to Harrison's property." "Yes, it will," Catherine agreed. "And when it does, everyone will know the truth about what happened to Thomas." As Blackwood and his men rode away, Catherine felt the tide beginning to turn. She still faced enormous challenges, but Rex had shown her something important. Truth had its own power, especially when it was backed by unwavering loyalty and the courage to speak it publicly. The battle for Thomas Harrison's legacy would be decided in 1 week, and Catherine Walsh intended to be ready. Dutch Kowalski's cabin, perched on a rocky outcrop 15 miles south of Helena, as isolated and independent as the grizzled prospector himself. The 70-year-old Polish immigrant had weathered 40 years in the Montana Territory, accumulating wisdom, scars, and an absolute distrust of large mining companies. His cabin was a fortress of hand-hewn logs and strategic thinking, positioned with clear views of all approaches and enough stored supplies to outlast a siege. "Blackwood's been trying to buy me out for 3 years, Dutch explained, as he served Catherine strong coffee that could strip paint. "Offered 10 times what this claim's worth, then 20 times. When I still said no, his boys started making night visits, leaving little reminders about accidents that could happen to stubborn old men. Rex had immediately taken to Dutch, recognizing a kindred spirit who valued loyalty and straight talk above social niceties. The St. Bernard lay beside the cabin's stone fireplace, finally relaxed for the first time since their confrontation in Helena. "What made you refuse his offers?" Catherine asked, studying the maps Dutch had spread across his rough-hewn table. Principal, Dutch replied without hesitation. My claim connects to a water source that feeds half the small operations in this district. Blackwood gets control of my land. He controls who gets water and who doesn't. Man could squeeze every independent miner out of business without firing a shot. Catherine studied the territorial map, beginning to understand the larger game Blackwood was playing. His company wasn't just accumulating individual claims, he was systematically gaining control of the infrastructure that made independent mining possible. Thomas's expanded claim would have blocked this strategy, she realized, tracing the boundaries with her finger. The cave system extends under territory Blackwood was trying to acquire. Exactly, Dutch confirmed. Tom figured that, out in his final weeks, smart man your Thomas. He realized Blackwood wasn't just after his gold, he was after control of the entire valley's mining future. Murphy had arrived that morning with disturbing news from town. Blackwood's not waiting for the hearing, he reported. His men are spreading word that you've abandoned the claim, that it's available for new filing. Some folks are already measuring boundaries, talking about jumping Tom's property. That's illegal until the court rules, Catherine protested. Legal and practical are different things out here, Dutch observed. Man shows up with enough guns and gold, he can make his own law until the territorial governor sends marshals to sort things out. Catherine felt the walls closing in around her. Even if she won the court hearing, Blackwood could simply ignore the ruling and dare anyone to challenge him. Without the resources to hire armed protection or influence territorial authorities, her legal victory would be meaningless. There might be another way, Dutch said thoughtfully, studying Rex. That dog of yours, he knows things Blackwood can't buy or steal. What if we use that knowledge against him? What do you mean? Well, Blackwood's whole operation depends on his reputation for success. Investors, territorial officials, even his own men follow him because they believe he's got the golden touch. But what if folks started questioning that reputation? Murphy caught on immediately. You're thinking about the other claims Blackwood's acquired. Some of those deals might not hold up to scrutiny, especially if it turned out some of the original owners met suspicious ends, Dutch added grimly. Tom wasn't the first small miner to die in convenient accidents after refusing Blackwood's offers. Catherine felt a chill of understanding. You think Blackwood has killed other people? I think convenient accidents happen awful regularly around Blackwood's business interests, Dutch replied carefully. But proving it would take evidence that nobody's been brave enough or smart enough to gather. Rex lifted his massive head, his intelligent eyes moving between the humans as if following their conversation. St. Bernard's expression suggested he understood more than a dog should about the discussion of justice and evidence. Rex might be the key, Catherine said slowly. He was with Thomas for years, traveled all over these mountains. If Blackwood eliminated other miners, Rex might have witnessed those crimes too. Dogs have a memory that they don't forget, Murphy agreed. The question is, how do we use what he knows? Dutch leaned back in his chair, his weathered face thoughtful. Tomorrow's market day in Helena. Blackwood always makes an appearance, likes to play the successful businessman for the crowds. What if Rex had a chance to identify other men involved? In Tom's death? That's dangerous, Murphy warned. If Blackwood realizes we're onto him, he might decide to eliminate witnesses permanently. He's already trying to eliminate us through the courts, Catherine pointed out. At least this way, we'd be taking action instead of just reacting to his moves. They spent the afternoon developing a plan that was equal parts clever and desperate. Catherine would return to Helena for the market day, ostensibly to gather supplies and witnesses for the hearing. Rex would accompany her, giving him the opportunity to observe Blackwood's men and potentially identify accomplices in Thomas's murder. But as evening approached, their planning was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Dutch immediately extinguished the cabin's lamps and they watched through shuttered windows as 6 riders approached in the gathering darkness. "Blackwood's men," Murphy whispered, recognizing the lead rider. "Must have tracked us here." Rex rose silently, his massive frame tense with alertness. The St. Bernard moved to the cabin door, positioning himself between Catherine and the approaching threat. "Dutch Kowalski," a voice called from outside. "We know you got company there. Send out the Walsh woman, and nobody gets hurt." Dutch checked his rifle's loading, his movements smooth with decades of practice. "Cabins have firing ports on all sides," he whispered to Catherine, "built it to withstand exactly this kind of visit." "We just want to talk business," the voice continued. "Mr. Blackwood's got a generous offer for the lady." "Talk during daylight hours like civilized folks," Dutch called back. "Night visits ain't welcome here. You're making this harder than it needs to be, old man. We got orders to bring Miss Walsh back for a conversation with Mr. Blackwood." Catherine felt rage building alongside her fear. Blackwood wasn't content with legal maneuvering. He was resorting to outright kidnapping to eliminate opposition to his plans. "What kind of conversation requires 6 armed men?" she called out, moving to a firing port where she could see the riders. "The kind where stubborn people learn about practical realities," came the reply. "You got 5 minutes to come out peaceful-like." Rex moved to Catherine's side, his protective instincts fully engaged. St. Bernard's low growl conveyed his readiness to defend her against any threat. "Dutch," Murphy whispered, "you got a back way out of here?" "Course I do, but running just puts us in the open, where they have all the advantages." Catherine studied the situation, weighing their limited options. 6 armed men against an elderly prospector, a trading post owner, and a woman with no combat experience. The odds were impossible, except for one factor Blackwood's men hadn't anticipated. "Rex," she whispered, "how good are you at night fighting?" St. Bernard's ears pricked forward and his tail wagged once, a gesture Catherine interpreted as confidence. "What are you thinking?" Dutch asked. "Rex knows these mountains better than any of Blackwood's men, and St. Bernards were bred for rescue work in dangerous conditions. If we can get outside, Rex might be able to level the odds." "That's a hell of a risk," Murphy warned. "Staying here is a bigger risk," Catherine replied. "They'll eventually smoke us out or burn us out. At least outside, Rex has room to maneuver." Dutch considered her logic, then nodded grimly. "The back door leads to a ravine. If we can reach it, there's cover all the way down to the creek." "Time's up," the voice outside called. "Coming in now." The first rider dismounted and approached the cabin door, confident in his numbers advantage. He never saw Rex emerge from the shadows beside the building until 180 pounds of protective fury knocked him from his feet. The St. Bernard's attack was silent and devastatingly effective, eliminating one threat before the others even realized they were under assault. "What the hell?" another rider shouted, drawing his weapon. But Rex was already moving, using the darkness and his knowledge of the terrain to strike from unexpected angles. Catherine, Dutch, and Murphy used the confusion to slip out the back and door, making their way toward the ravine as Rex continued his devastating harassment of Blackwood's men. The St. Bernard wasn't killing, but he was systematically disabling horses and riders with surgical precision. "That dog's like a one-man army," Dutch marveled as they reached the cover of the ravine. Rex appeared beside them moments later, panting but uninjured. The sounds of cursing and confused shouting from the cabin area suggested Blackwood's men were in full retreat. "They'll be back," Murphy warned, "probably with more men." "Then we better make sure we're not here when they arrive," Catherine said. Dutch led them through a network of game trails that wound deeper into the mountains, paths invisible to anyone unfamiliar with the terrain. Rex ranged ahead, his keen senses alert for any signs of pursuit or ambush. By dawn, they had reached a hidden canyon where the Dutch maintained a secondary cache of supplies. The location was virtually inaccessible except on foot, surrounded by steep cliffs that would make mounted pursuit impossible. "This is it," Catherine said, as they rested beside a clear mountain stream. "The point of no return." "What do you mean?" Murphy asked. "Blackwood just declared war." "There's no going back to legal proceedings and polite negotiations. From here on, it's a fight for survival." Dutch nodded approvingly. "Girls got sand. Took you long enough to realize what you're really up against. So what's our next move?" Murphy asked. Catherine looked at Rex, who was drinking from the stream with calm dignity. St. Bernard had just proven himself in combat, protecting them against impossible odds. Thomas had trained him well, but Rex's loyalty and courage were entirely his own. "We go on the offensive," Catherine decided. "Blackwood wants to play by frontier rules instead of territorial law. Then we'll show him what frontier justice looks like." "That's dangerous talk," Murphy warned. "You're talking about taking on a man with 50 employees and territorial political connections." "I'm talking about exposing a murderer," Catherine corrected. "Thomas died because he threatened Blackwood's control of this valley. Other miners probably died for the same reason. Rex can help us prove that." Dutch smiled with genuine pleasure. "Now you're thinking like a mountain woman instead of an eastern lady." "What's the difference?" Catherine asked. "Mountain women don't ask permission to defend what's rightfully hers." Rex returned from the stream and settled beside Catherine, his intelligent eyes reflecting complete trust in her leadership. St. Bernard had chosen his new partner, and that partnership would be tested in the crucible of the coming confrontation. With Silas Blackwood. "Tomorrow we return to Helena," Catherine announced. "Not to hide or negotiate, but to finish what Thomas started." The crucial decision had been made. Catherine Walsh was no longer the Eastern bride seeking safety and conventional marriage. She had become something the Montana Territory had never seen before. A woman prepared to fight for justice with a St. Bernard as her weapon and the truth as her shield. The final battle for Thomas Harrison's legacy was about to begin. Market, day in. Helena dawned crisp and clear, the territorial capital bustling with farmers, miners and merchants conducting their weekly business. Catherine Walsh walked among the crowd with purposeful confidence, her plain wool dress and practical boots marking her as someone who belonged in this frontier community. Rex padded beside her, his massive presence drawing admiring comments from children and respectful nods from adults who recognized the legendary St. Bernard, but Catherine's attention focused on a specific figure across the market square. Silas Blackwood stood beside his ornate carriage, conducting business with territorial officials and wealthy investors. He wore an expensive suit that proclaimed his success, speaking with animated gestures about mining opportunities and economic development. To casual observers, he appeared to be exactly what he claimed, a successful businessman contributing to Montana Territory's growth. Rex saw something different. St. Bernard's entire demeanor changed when his gaze fixed on Blackwood. His ears flattened against his massive head. His muscles tensed, and a low rumble emanated from his chest that spoke of barely contained fury. "Easy, boy," Catherine whispered, though she felt the same anger burning in her own heart. Judge Harrison had agreed to hold the hearing in the town square rather than his cramped courthouse, allowing the entire community to witness the proceedings. A makeshift platform had been erected where both parties would present their evidence, with the judge presiding from behind a simple wooden table. Murphy and Dutch flanked Catherine as she approached the platform, their presence providing moral support and physical protection. Word of the previous night's attack had spread through Helena's mining community, and Catherine noticed clusters of independent miners watching the proceedings with unusual interest. "Miss Walsh," Judge Harrison called out, "are you prepared to present your case?" I am, Your Honor. Catherine climbed onto the platform, Thomas's leather satchel containing all his papers and journals. Blackwood followed, accompanied by two well-dressed lawyers and a stack of official-looking documents. His confidence appeared unshakable, but Catherine noticed his eyes avoided looking directly at Rex. "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Harrison began, "please present your evidence supporting your claim to the Harrison mining property." Blackwood's lead attorney, a sharp-featured man named Stevens, stood to address the crowd. "Your Honor, members of the community, my client has presented clear documentation showing that Thomas Harrison had entered into preliminary negotiations to sell his claim to Blackwood Mining Enterprises. These negotiations were substantially advanced at the time of Mr. Harrison's unfortunate death. Stevens presented a series of papers purporting to show correspondence between Thomas and Blackwood's company. The documents appeared professionally prepared, with official seals and witness signatures. Catherine studied the papers carefully when they were handed to her for examination. The handwriting looked similar to Thomas's, but something felt wrong about the letter formations and word choices. "Your Honor," Catherine said, "I'd like to call a witness to examine these documents." From the crowd stepped an elderly man Catherine had never seen before. He introduced himself as Samuel Wright, territorial document examiner and former associate of Thomas Harrison. "I worked with Tom Harrison on several mining surveys over the years," Wright testified. "These documents purporting to be his correspondence are forgeries. The handwriting is close, but not exact. More importantly, Tom never used certain words and phrases that appear in these letters." A murmur ran through the crowd. Blackwood's confident expression faltered slightly, but Stevens quickly objected. "This man's testimony is hearsay, Your Honor. Without expert analysis, his opinion carries no legal weight." Judge Harrison considered the objection. "Mr. Wright's professional qualifications give his testimony some validity, but it's not conclusive evidence of forgery." Catherine felt frustration rising, but Rex provided unexpected assistance. St. Bernard suddenly stood and walked directly to the stack of documents on Blackwood's table. Before anyone could stop him, Rex grabbed one of the papers in his massive jaws and returned to Catherine's side. "Control that animal," Stevens demanded. "Rex, drop it," Catherine commanded, though she was curious about what the dog had selected. Rex released the paper into Catherine's hands. It was one of the alleged correspondence pieces, but as Catherine examined it more closely, she noticed something the lawyers had missed. In the corner of the document was a small notation in pencil. BME, Draft 3. "Your Honor," Catherine said, holding up the paper, "this document is marked as a third draft by Blackwood Mining Enterprises. Original correspondence doesn't go through multiple drafts." The crowd murmured with interest. Judge Harrison examined the marking through his spectacles, his expression growing stern. "Mr. Stevens, how do you explain this notation?" Stevens fumbled for an answer. "Clerical error, Your Honor, meaningless administrative marking." But Catherine wasn't finished. "Rex," she said quietly, "find Thomas." St. Bernard's ears pricked forward, understanding immediately. He moved through the crowd with purpose, his keen nose working to identify specific scents. Rex stopped beside. Three men standing at the edge of the gathering, men Catherine recognized as Blackwood's employees. Rex's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. He planted himself directly in front of the three men and released a series of sharp, accusatory barks that echoed across the market square. "What's wrong with that dog?" one of the men asked nervously. "Rex remembers you," Catherine said clearly, her voice carrying across the square. "He remembers you from Thomas's claim on the day he died." The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Judge Harrison leaned forward with interest. "Miss Walsh, are you suggesting these men were present?" At the Avalanche site, I'm suggesting Rex witnessed Thomas's murder, and he's identifying the men responsible. Blackwood stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. You can't base accusations on a dog's behavior. But Rex wasn't finished. He moved to each of the three men in turn, his barks becoming more agitated. One of them, a nervous-looking man with a scar across his cheek, began backing away from St. Bernard's obvious hostility. "Rex doesn't lie," called out a voice from the crowd. An elderly miner stepped forward. "I've known that dog for years. He's never been wrong about people." Other voices joined in agreement. The mining community had known Rex and Thomas for years, and St. Bernard's reputation for intelligence and loyalty was legendary. "Judge Harrison," Catherine said, "I'd like to present additional evidence." She opened Thomas's journal to the final entries, reading aloud his warnings about Blackwood's threats and his fears for his safety. The crowd listened in absolute silence as Catherine detailed Thomas's discoveries and his belief that Blackwood would kill to prevent the expanded claim filing. "Furthermore," Catherine continued, "I have evidence that Thomas wasn't Blackwood's first victim." She produced documents Dutch had provided, death certificates and accident reports for 3 other miners who had died in suspicious circumstances after refusing Blackwood's buyout offers. "Coincidence?" Stevens objected, but his voice lacked conviction. "Rex," Catherine said, "show us who else you remember." The St. Bernard moved through the crowd again, this time stopping beside 2 other men. His reaction was less agitated but equally clear. These were men he recognized as threats. One of the men Rex identified was wearing a Blackwood Mining Enterprises badge. The other was dressed as a territorial official. "That's Deputy Marshal Franklin," someone in the crowd whispered. "He investigated the mining accidents." Judge Harrison's expression had grown increasingly stern as the evidence mounted. "Deputy Franklin, do you care to explain why this dog seems to recognize you in connection with these deaths?" Franklin looked around nervously, clearly recognizing that the crowd's mood was turning hostile. "I investigated all mining accidents in this district. Of course, the dog might have seen me. But Rex doesn't react to other lawmen the same way," Catherine pointed out. "Only to men he associates with Thomas's death." The scarred man who had been trying to back away from Rex suddenly broke and ran. His flight sparked immediate pursuit by several miners, and within moments he was dragged back to the platform. "Tell them what happened at Harrison's claim," Dutch Kowalski demanded, his rifle pointed at the man's chest. "I ain't saying nothing," the man replied, but his fear was obvious. Rex moved closer to the captured man, his massive presence radiating menace. St. Bernard didn't attack, but his intent was clear: justice for his murdered master. "Your Honor," Blackwood interjected desperately, "this entire proceeding has become a mob action. I demand we return to proper legal procedure." But Judge Harrison had heard enough. "Mr. Blackwood, the evidence presented here suggests serious criminal activity connected to your business operations. I'm ordering a full territorial investigation into Thomas Harrison's death and the other suspicious mining accidents. Furthermore," the judge continued, "I'm ruling that Miss Walsh has presented clear evidence of her legitimate claim to the Harrison mining property. The forged documents submitted by your attorneys have undermined any credibility your case might have possessed." The crowd erupted in cheers. Catherine felt tears of relief and triumph streaming down her face as Rex pressed against her side, his mission finally accomplished. But Blackwood wasn't finished. "This ruling won't stand," he snarled. "I have connections throughout the territorial government. One woman and a dog can't destroy everything I've built." "Maybe not," Catherine replied, "but they can start the process." Over the following weeks, the territorial investigation uncovered evidence of a systematic campaign of murder and intimidation stretching back 5 years. Rex's ability to identify witnesses and locations proved invaluable to investigators, and several of Blackwood's men confessed in exchange for reduced sentences. Blackwood himself fled the territory before he could be arrested, abandoning his mining empire and leaving his victims' families to claim compensation from his seized assets. Catherine took possession of Thomas's claim and the expanded mineral rights his surveys had documented. The cave system proved to contain gold deposits worth more than she could have imagined, providing security not just for herself, but for the entire community of independent miners. She built a new cabin on the claim site, larger and more comfortable than Thomas's original home, but positioned so that Rex could maintain his watch over the valley. St. Bernard seemed to approve of the location, settling into his role as guardian of both Catherine and the mining community. Dutch Kowalski became Catherine's business partner and closest advisor, his experience and connections helping her navigate the complexities of large-scale mining operations. Murphy continued running his trading post, but also served as Catherine's agent in town, ensuring fair treatment for all the small miners in the district. As autumn painted the mountains in brilliant colors, Catherine stood on her cabin porch watching. Rex patrolled the valley with dignified authority. The St. Bernard had aged gracefully into his role as elder statesman of the mining community, respected by humans and animals alike. Spring brought new challenges and opportunities to the valley. Catherine established the Harrison Foundation, using profits from the mine to provide low-interest loans and equipment to struggling prospectors. Rex became the unofficial mascot of this endeavor, his presence at foundation meetings somehow ensuring that only honest applicants received assistance. The territorial governor visited that summer, drawn by reports of the extraordinary legal case and the dog who had served as a living witness to murder. Governor Potts spent an entire afternoon with Rex, marveling at St. Bernard's intelligence and dignity. He later wrote to territorial newspapers describing Rex as a better judge of character than most humans I've encountered in politics. Catherine's mining operation grew to employ 37 people, but she maintained the cooperative principles Thomas had believed in. Workers received profit shares rather than just wages, and safety protocols were rigorously enforced after Rex demonstrated an uncanny ability to sense unstable ground or dangerous gas accumulations in the mine shafts. St. Bernard's reputation spread beyond Montana territory. Mining engineers from Colorado and California traveled to observe Rex's techniques for identifying promising ore veins and safe excavation routes. Catherine documented these methods in a comprehensive manual that became required reading at territorial mining schools. Word of Catherine's success reached back to Philadelphia, where former colleagues at Miss Whitmore's academy marveled at reports of their former teacher's transformation into a frontier mining baroness. Several enterprising women wrote requesting advice about establishing their own Western enterprises, and Catherine found herself inadvertently becoming a symbol of feminine independence in territorial newspapers. The Philadelphia Inquirer published a lengthy feature article titled "From School Mom to Mining Queen, The Remarkable Journey of Catherine Walsh," which sparked national interest in her story. Eastern investors began approaching Catherine with offers to expand operations, but she remained committed to maintaining the cooperative principles that honored Thomas's memory. Rex's fame grew alongside Catherine's. Journalists from Harper's Weekly and Leslie's Illustrated traveled to Montana Territory specifically to document the remarkable St. Bernard who had solved murders and guided mining operations. Rex tolerated the attention with characteristic dignity, though Catherine suspected he preferred his ordinary duties as valley guardian. The cabin Catherine built became a gathering place for the mining community, where disputes were settled and partnerships formed under Rex's watchful supervision. She instituted weekly community meetings, where problems were discussed openly and solutions developed cooperatively. St. Bernard seemed to understand his role as keeper of Thomas's legacy, ensuring that the cooperative spirit Thomas had valued continued to guide the valley's development. Educational opportunities expanded as the valley prospered. Catherine hired a teacher for the growing number of miners' children, establishing the first formal school in the district. Rex often visited the classroom, much to the children's delight, and proved remarkably patient with youngsters who wanted to practice their reading by reciting lessons to his attentive ears. Medical care improved dramatically when Catherine recruited Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, one of the few female physicians in the territory, to establish a clinic in the valley. Dr. Morrison was initially skeptical about practicing in such a remote location, but Rex's immediate acceptance of her presence convinced her that this was, indeed, a special community worth serving. The winter of 1885 brought the harshest conditions anyone could remember, with temperatures dropping to 40 below zero and snow accumulating to unprecedented depths. Many isolated mining camps faced starvation, but Catherine organized relief expeditions guided by Rex's knowledge of safe travel routes through the treacherous terrain. Rex proved invaluable during rescue operations, his keen senses able to locate trapped miners and his strength capable of breaking through snow barriers that blocked human rescuers. St. Bernard's heroic efforts during that terrible winter saved dozens of lives and cemented his reputation as a legendary figure throughout Montana Territory. By winter's return, Catherine had transformed from an Eastern schoolteacher into a respected voice in territorial mining policy. She testified before the territorial legislature about safety regulations and workers' rights, with Rex always at her side, providing silent but powerful testimony about the importance of loyalty and trust in dangerous occupations. Catherine often found herself thinking about the letters that had brought her west, wondering if Thomas could have foreseen how their planned partnership would evolve. She had come seeking marriage and found something far more valuable, a purpose that honored both his memory and her own newfound strength. The territorial capital recognized Catherine's contributions by appointing her to the Mining Safety Commission, making her the first woman to serve in such a capacity. Her recommendations for improved safety protocols and worker protections became territorial law, saving countless lives in mines throughout Montana. Rex aged gracefully into his role as elder statesman, his snow-white muzzle and deliberate movements lending even greater dignity to his already impressive presence. Young dogs in the mining camps seemed to sense his authority, often following him on his daily patrols as if learning the responsibilities of mountain guardianship. Catherine established a breeding program to preserve Rex's remarkable bloodline, carefully selecting mates that possessed similar intelligence and temperament. The resulting puppies were distributed to mining operations throughout the territory, creating a network of canine safety experts who saved numerous lives through their inherited abilities to detect dangerous conditions. The final vindication came 3 years after Blackwood's flight, when territorial marshals captured him, attempting to establish a new operation in Wyoming Territory. His trial provided complete closure for Thomas's murder, with Rex's identification of the conspirators proving crucial to securing convictions. Catherine attended the proceedings not for revenge, but to ensure that justice truly was served for all of Blackwood's victims. Standing in that Wyoming courthouse, Catherine reflected on her extraordinary journey from Philadelphia schoolteacher to Montana mining entrepreneur. The transformation had required courage she hadn't known she possessed, but Rex had been there for every step, providing guidance, protection, and unwavering loyalty. As they returned to their mountain valley, Catherine realized that her story had become something larger than personal triumph. Letters arrived regularly from women across the nation seeking advice about pursuing their own independence in the Western Territories. Catherine responded to each inquiry thoughtfully, always emphasizing that success required not just courage, but also the wisdom to recognize and value true partnerships. The greatest testament to Catherine's success came when the territorial legislature officially designated the valley as the Harrison Mining District, in honor of Thomas's memory and Catherine's achievements. A bronze plaque was installed at the entrance to the district, featuring an engraved image of Rex alongside the inscription, "In memory of Thomas Harrison and in honor of the partnership between Catherine Walsh and Rex, whose loyalty proved that justice knows no species." Rex's legacy extended beyond mining safety to become a symbol of faithfulness and courage throughout the American West. Children's books began featuring stories inspired by the remarkable St. Bernard, and his image appeared on territorial promotional materials encouraging settlement and investment. In the end, Thomas Harrison's greatest gift to Catherine wasn't the gold he had discovered or the claim he had willed to her. It was Rex, a companion whose devotion had bridged the gap between the life she had lost and the life she had chosen to build in the vast, challenging, and ultimately rewarding wilderness of the American frontier. The mail-order bride who had arrived with nothing but hope and determination had become a force for justice, prosperity, and progress in the Montana Territory. And beside her always stood Rex, the St. Bernard whose extraordinary abilities and unwavering loyalty had made it all possible. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.